Yeah, thanks Ryan and Professor Schulzman inviting me to this seminar. Really excited to have the chance to talk about our work. Um, so yeah, as Ryan just mentioned, like through the conversation with him, I learned that you all have some sort of like certain knowledge about this paper, but I think this talk is not only introducing or repeating the same content in the paper, but trying to also introduce a bit newer results and exciting work that is ongoing in the lab. So yeah, I think it's not gonna be very boring if it's because it's not just with the paper itself. Okay, so yeah, this another thing I want to say is this is really a joint work in collaboration, in a joint work with grad students and postdoc in the lab. Also, it's in collaboration with many experimental neuroscientists at Columbia. Um, so who make these contribution to this work. Okay, so to start, let me just motivate this work a little bit. In recent years, there has been an explosion of interest in recording behavior videos during neuroscience experiments. And often the goal of recording such data is to provide fruitful descriptions for neural behavioral analysis. However, feeding these models between high-dimensional behavior videos and potentially high-dimensional neural data is a challenging statistical problem. So typically, we want to start by extracting meaningful information from these videos by finding an interpretable low-dimensional representation via algorithms such as pose tracking, behavior segmentation, and video compression, right? And then we can decode meaningful descriptors of behavior and have more interpretable decoders or predictors for neural encoding models in the downstream analysis. Okay, but in this talk, I'm only gonna focus on the first step of this whole behavioral analysis pipeline. So let's start with tracking, which is also referred to as pose estimation. In a tracking task, we aim at obtaining a bunch of key points capturing the pose of the animal in a video. Animal pose estimation is a critical scientific task in neuroscience in recent years. State-of-the-art methods have been proposed to extract the behavioral traces from videos. And they open up an exciting array of new applications and new scientific questions to be addressed. A base model that is shared among all these methods is as follows. For a single frame with labels, we input the single frame into a neural network module. This is the backbone of the pose estimation algorithm. Then we predict the label of each target from the neural network or each body part. We finally construct the loss by comparing the predicted labels with the ground truth labels. However, there are some limitations of such a base model. The first is it only trains on label frames, but much more of information that labels about these images could be found in unlabeled frames as well. So we could include unlabeled frames to enhance the training of the network. Second, even with hundreds of labels, users still often see occasional glitches, which implies that the tracking is briefly lost. And these occasional glitches cannot be easily or effectively smoothed out, therefore will typically interfere with downstream analysis of these extracted behaviors. So our solution is to incorporate temporal and spatial constraints from the behavioral videos to smooth out these glitches during training. So we propose a new probabilistic graphical model named Deep Graph Pose, which is also built upon the base model. The output of the network is the confidence map for each body part. And the values of the pixels in these confidence maps are from 0 to 1, indicating how likely these pixels belong to the true body part. And moreover, given the true labels, we can construct Gaussian bumps for each label with the peaks at the true locations. The loss function is constructed from the to match the input confidence to match the output confidence maps to the Gaussian bumps. We can simplify this pipeline into a 3-node graph. The input node is the frame denoted as xt for time t, and the other 2 nodes are the output Gaussian bumps constructed for the 2 body parts in this example, which are the pole and the arm, denoted as y1 and y2 at time t. And the orange link is the network module or network click phi n. Now, let's expand this graph along time axis to include unlabeled frames at time t-1 and t+1. We can build the same graph for unlabeled frames. We just don't know the ground truth for these 2 body parts. We now have the network click phi n for both labeled and unlabeled frames. They basically use the same click phi n, right? But for the label frame, the click tries to match up the confidence map read from the network module to the Gaussian bump constructed from the ground truth label, as we just explained. For the unlabeled frame, the click still tries to match up the confidence map against the Gaussian bump. The only difference is the Gaussian now is constructed from the predicted label read from the peak of the Gaussian bump, of the confidence map. So people may ask, there seems to be no additional information here contained in this Gaussian, since the Gaussian bump would be located at the same position of the peak of the confidence map. However, by imposing the similarity between these 2 parts, we explicitly add a unimodal constraint onto the confidence map for all unlabeled frames. This is the additional information we bring to the model. It's a structural assumption. And the model with losses over both labeled and unlabeled frames is what we call a semi-supervised learning model. It encourages the confidence map to be unimodal, and I will show how critical this unimodal assumption is in the experiment later. Next, we add a temporal click phi t colored in blue to enforce temporal continuity of the same body parts across frames. These are indicated by the blue links in the graph on the left. We also add a spatial click phi s to connect body parts who share a skeletal connection in between at each time point. Then, with both temporal and spatial constraints, we could smooth out these glitches that break these constraints during training. Moreover, we hope that the additional links we add to the graph could propagate information from label markers to unlabeled markers. And note that the temporal and spatial constraints are not post hoc smoothing after we get the traces, such as applying Kalman filter to the extracted traces. We use these constraints to train a stronger or better post-estimation algorithm. And the proposed dip graph pose is a probabilistic graphical model. So we need to do inference to solve the model. We model the unobserved markers as hidden random variables, and we can write down the posterior of these hidden markers. YH is hidden marker, X is observed improved frame, YO is observed marker, and theta is the network parameter, which is also unknown. Phi n, phi s, phi t are the 3 clicks we introduced to the model, and z is some unknown normalizing constant. Calculating it would be intractable. The goal is to infer the latent markers and the network parameters. Here we solve the intractable inference by developing a structured variational inference. I'm not going to elaborate the technical details here, but would love to discuss them later after the presentation. So here is a comparison of the base model and DGP side by side. We can clearly see that DGP extends the base model by considering unlabeled frames and linking body parts together both temporally and spatially. Okay, now I'm showing the performance on a mouse data set, we're interested in tracking 4 fingers on the left paw in this data set. And this data set is a sparsely labeled example with 55 label frames among 1,000 frames. We compared DeepLabCut, which is a fully supervised learning model on the left, with our proposed semi-supervised model on the right. We see that the outputs of DGP are more accurate and robust. To better understand where this difference in performance may come from, we look at the confidence maps from both models for a single finger, which is the middle finger. We can note that the errors in DLC on the left arise from the multimodality of the confidence map, while DGP outputs a unimodal confidence map, which is due to the semi-supervised learning framework. And we can see similar comparisons across all 4 fingers. Now, I'm showing you the 4 traces, the 4 fingers correspond to the X coordinates of the 4 fingers. And the red traces are DLC, the blue traces are DGP. And the gray vertical lines that we can see across these trace plots correspond to the 55 label frames that we use as label training data. And in DGP, these label frames are also used along with some unlabeled frames in the video for training. This figure shows that there are particular segments in the video, for example, between frames 50 to 150 and frames 450 to 470, where many of the errors in DLC are concentrated. And to overcome these errors, one might think like we can always add some more label frames or label training data. However, this is exactly what we are trying to prevent. Besides, identifying these error cases without any ground truth knowledge can be non-trivial. So instead, we the blue traces from DGP show us that we can do better even without adding additional label frames during the training process. Okay. Also in the paper, we show results on a variety of data sets with multiple species, including zebrafish, mouse, and fly. Here I'm showing another example, a snippet of a fish data set where we tracked the 5 different body parts of the fish, and we used 20 label frames in a 1,000 frame long video, and we still achieve better results using DGP over DLC. Okay, previously, I've only showed the comparison qualitatively. Here, I'm showing the comparison quantitatively by using these numbers. We include an intermediate model DGP Semi, and DGP Semi is a semi-supervised learning model without any temporal spatial clicks or constraints. So by looking at this bar plot on the left, we can tell that the semi-supervised part improves the performance substantially, especially in sparsely labeled regime where the training set fraction is small. And the performance can be further improved when we include spatial and temporal components as in the full DGP model. Okay, so given the estimated traces for all 4 fingers, we can now consider the task of segmenting these traces into interpretable discrete states, which are resting and moving periods in this example video. Our approach is to use a 2-state autoregressive hidden Markov model, or ARHMM for short. It is a method that identifies a discrete set of linear dynamics in time series data. Here you can see the X and Y traces for a single finger, and the black traces are the ground truths. The blue traces are the markers inferred by DGP. The background pink color indicates the resting state that we estimate from by using the model. We say that it's resting because the traces during those periods show little to no changes, and green indicates the moving states. if we now look at the red DLC traces and their segmentation by ARHMM, we can find that the glitches, especially between frame 100 and 150, lead to erroneous state switches. So we can conclude that a high quality of post-estimation from DGP can benefit this downstream behavior segmentation task, rendering us interpretable dynamic states to understand the behavior of this mouse. Okay, next we combine the tracking information we obtain from DGP with a video compression approach to learn interpretable latent representations from video. This is the second downstream application with DGP. But this is a bit different from what we show in the paper. This is more advanced. We actually develop a bit advanced model for this downstream application. So let me briefly introduce that. A baseline video compression method refers to an autoencoder where we input the frames into an encoder, obtain some low dimensional latents, and reconstruct the frames using a decoder. It doesn't require the human level supervision as in tracking, but the latents of these autoencoder are notoriously difficult to interpret. Individual dimensions of latents may represent many aspects of the video simultaneously. Furthermore, the autoencoder doesn't allow experimenters to mark features of interest and introduce this marked features into the modeling of the autoencoder. Okay. Therefore, we attempt to combine the strengths of tracking and compression in order to increase the interpretability of the model of the low dimensional representation. So this is the new compression model we built, integrating the tracking information from DGP. We introduced this subspace of marker-related latents. These latents encode the input frames and are decoded to generate the markers, which are the X and Y traces. Then presumably the autoencoder latents should now capture variability in the behavior video that is not accounted for by the marker-related latents. Finally, we reconstruct the frames from the combined set of latents. Given this model, we could now ask how well that marker-related subspace is mapped to the reconstructed frames through the frame decoder. In this example, the markers are the left pole and the right pole. We first take the latent dimension associated with the X value of the left pole. For example, you can think of these blue dots in this latent space to be the X value of the left pole. And we move these blue values or blue dots up and down, but keeping all the other values fixed. We observe that our model has learned a single latent dimension that is mapped to the horizontal position of the left pole. Importantly, there's no vertical movement of the left pole, nor any movement of the right pole. All of that information should be contained in other dimensions of the latent. And we call this phenomenon to be disentanglement. And we can do similar manipulation of the latents in the marker-related subspace and see similar disentanglement across dimensions. Similarly, we can ask how well the autoencoder subspace is mapped to the reconstructed frames, which will also give us some idea of what information that subspace contains. For the first latent, you can clearly see the jaw opening and the tongue extending, while other aspects of the image, notably the pole positions, stay constant. And the second latent corresponds to the local movements of the pole along the base of the holder, most likely capturing these small movements that are not accounted for in the tracking information. So, okay, now we are able to interpret these autoencoder latents right now. And what we can do with these latents, right? We can segment just a subregion of the video focusing on the pole or the face. we can decode individual dimensions of behavior and have more interpretable predictors for neural encoding models. So the contributions of this work are, first, we propose a novel new tracking algorithm, deep graph pose, which can provide us more robust and accurate tracking performance. We also show an improved video segmentation task with the high quality of the DGP markers. And finally, we propose a new compression method, a video compression method using the DGP tracking information. Especially this part, later we actually extend this part into a longer journal paper, which is shown here, the partitioning variability in animal behavior videos using semi-supervised Verizon autoencoder. We just released this, an archive version earlier this month. So please take a look at that if you're interested. Okay. Basically, the high-level goal across all these tasks and models is really to extract interpretable low-dimensional representation of behaviors for better and more interpretable downstream analysis relating to the neural data. Okay, moreover, there is some exciting ongoing work in the Paneski lab at Columbia focusing on different animal behavior tracking problems. Dan and Sen are two graduate students who are working on multi-camera 3D tracking. I'm also working with another grad student on multi-animal extension of DGP. Another exciting thing I want to introduce here briefly is the Paneski lab and Cunningham lab and Columbia have been developing an open source cloud processing infrastructure called NeuroCast. It is a drag and drop cloud neural data analysis platform. Users don't need to install software or buy any hardware. It's completely free, easy to use, and with technical support. Some existing analysis tools include DeepLabCal, local NMF, YAS, LFAS, LDS, and so forth. And currently, DGP has also been integrated into this infrastructure, and people in the lab are also working on real-time DGP and Ensemble DGP on this platform. So please take a look at those methods or this platform if you're interested. And that's it. That's basically the end of the talk. And thanks for your attention and interest in my presentation. And I think I'm ready to take questions.